Welcome to the First Draft Club, a podcast to help you write your book with joy, clarity, and maybe a few coffee stains. I'm Mary Adkins.
Dear Mary, help. My problem is I always start projects, but I can never ever seem to finish them. I probably have a dozen or more half-written drafts on my computer. Some are short, less than 10,000 words, and others are significantly longer, 50,000 words or more. I'll feel inspired for a while, spend countless hours working on something. Then I'll either lose interest or second guess myself or just get distracted by life. WTF do I do to stay focused on one project and see it through to the end? For the record, I don't struggle with commitment in my daily life. I'm actually a Libra, so committing comes very naturally to me, except when it comes to novels. I cannot seem to commit to them. Sincerely, lost in literary limbo. All right, lost in literary limbo. I have a few ideas for you. So the first is to read the book The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. If you listen to this podcast for very long, you're probably going to hear me reference The War of Art about a dozen more times, depending on how many more episodes I make. It's a really fantastic book. It's super short. It's a really quick read. And if you haven't heard of it by this point in your writing career, you will almost certainly hear of it at some point, because Steven Pressfield is really given credit with coining the term resistance. Resistance is the sort of inevitable pushback that you get whenever you try to create something new in the universe. Resistance can take the form of fear, like you're afraid of failure or you're afraid of success, but it can take other forms. It can take the form of obligations that get in the way, a sense of responsibility. It can take the form of FOMO, like wanting to do something else other than sitting and writing. It can take the form of, most commonly, I think, is self-doubt, just doubting yourself that you can actually get this done and that it will be any good. So typically when I hear from people that they've stopped working on a project, especially if they've gotten as far as the 50,000 word point, which when we're talking about book length works, so I work with people on novels and memoirs, we're talking about manuscripts that are 70,000 words or longer. Typically, on average. There are exceptions. If you're writing for a young adult audience or a middle grade audience, like if you're writing for children or if you're writing a different kind of book, it may be different than that, but typically we're talking about 70 to 90 or so thousand words. So if you've made it to the 50K mark, you've really made it a long way through that project. And that makes me think of resistance, because what Steven Pressfield talks about in that, again, short little book that I recommend you just read because it's fast, is how resistance grows in proportion to how close we are to finishing our goals. So you're at 50K, you're just needing to get to 70K. You're really in the final stretch there. And so it makes sense that that would be why suddenly you're finding it harder to write than you were previously. And I'm not going to do his philosophy justice by talking too much about resistance, although I do love talking about it. So I just recommend you read that book. But I have a couple of other concrete ideas for you. So the next idea is, if this were a work project, you would not be able to put it away, right? You would have to finish it. And so you wouldn't be able to put it in a drawer and just say, I'm not confident or I'm not feeling it, so I'm just going to stick it in here and call it a day. So think of it like that. Try to imagine that you are working for a boss, you're working for yourself, and you have been assigned this task and you must finish this task. It's part of your job requirements. It's something that you are being compensated for. Tell yourself that if you need to, but finish the thing in the same way that you would finish a work project. This could mean writing a bad ending. Like a terrible, awful 2-page ending. You have 50,000 words. Now you have 50,500 words. Like, tack an ending on that thing. And what I predict is that the bad ending will make you so furious that you will want to go in and fix it. You will suddenly start having ideas for how to make it better, because it's impossible not to make it better, because you just wrote a super crappy ending. And so all you have to do now to make it better is very little. You're basically here in this situation, you're changing the starting point, the default. So right now, your default is there is no ending, and I'm trying to work up the courage to finish. But what you're changing it into is I've finished this thing, and the first 90% is really great, and the last 10% is awful and embarrassing. So now, instead of, oh my gosh, finishing a book, which sounds super daunting, now the task is, oh, I just need to fix the last 10% of it. And then the third point I want to make here is, and maybe the most important of my three responses, is that I think losing interest in a draft is a very good piece of information for you. I realized this a year or so ago for myself. When I have lost interest, that is a really important observation, because if I have lost interest in writing the book, it's very likely that a reader has lost interest in reading a book. And so what do I want to do with that? Well, I have some choices, but the most important takeaway first is that you don't want to keep writing when you know your reader doesn't want to keep reading. Something is going to have to change. So what would make you want to keep reading from here? That's the question to ask yourself. What would make me want to keep reading? Another way of thinking about it, if you prefer, is what makes me want to keep writing? What excites me to sit down and write? Often what this can lead to is a realization that something new needs to happen. It's time for your story to change. It's time for something weird. We need to change things up. We need a new obstacle. We need a twist. We need something unexpected to happen. And it's okay if that means it suddenly feels like a different book. I find when I'm writing novels that there comes a point where suddenly it feels like, oh, I've really changed things. I've resolved what we thought the issue was, and now a new, more difficult, thornier issue has come to light. And that can feel that you're suddenly, as you're writing it, can sometimes feel like you're suddenly starting to write a slightly different book. And that's okay. That's, in fact, a good thing, because you're complicating things and you're taking the characters on a journey that's more complex than just one note or one dimension. So my guess is that where you're often stopping is probably around that point, that sort of act 2 to act 3 point, or that kind of act 1 to act 2 point, where something needs to give, and it needs to give way into a new problem for your characters to solve that excites you to sit down and write about. In sum, go read The War of Art, pick it up. It's slim volume. It won't take you long. 2, imagine it's a work project and you have to finish it, even if that means tacking on a 2-page terrible ending. Odds are you will be so displeased with that ending that you'll want to get in there and fix it. And number 3, think of losing interest as a good piece of information from which you as the writer can learn. Often it can be a signal that something needs to change in your draft.
Thanks for listening to the First Draft Club. Subscribe and leave a review, and I will adore you forever. And if you want to submit your own questions and attend these sessions live, you can join our community of authors. Happy writing!